Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is iRunShib, or Shib for short. I appreciate you being here today. Obviously, you're excited about Diablo 4 like I am if you're clicking on this video. The goal of these videos is to dive into some potential builds for Diablo 4, and we're going to start with my favorite class since Diablo 2, the Necromancer.
We are the speakers of the dead, and the dead have no mercy.
So typically you understand how the Necromancer works. You're going to have skeletal warriors, skeletal mages, and golems around you at all times, while still having mage-like or physical type abilities. You're going to be rolling around the battlefield, letting your minions do the work for you. That being said, in Diablo 4, there's a whole nother aspect to the Necromancer that has never been touched before, and that is eliminating your summons for passive buffs that'll be with you forever. I took that idea and ran with it. Imagine a solo blood Necromancer, one that only uses the Golem as their summon and sacrifices the other two summons to increase their buffs and keep them as tanky as possible. I was building this by myself late at night, just trying to see how the synergies would work, and I found it to be insane. I am very excited to talk about this build. Granted, some of this stuff is subject to change, but I am very confident that this is going to be an avenue you can take that will be very strong. Let's talk about how it synergizes right now. So the Necromancer in this game has the ability to be very tanky, and one thing that I wanted to focus on in this build is that I wanted to build myself as an insane solo tank that can also deal damage while still being on the front line and keeping my health bar at the top, because I will actually do more damage the more healthy I am, and that is something we'll talk about as we go through the build. So in the beginning, first I want to discuss that Diablo, there's going to be a node tree type skill system, which as you can see here, you're going to be building skills, and then as you put more skill points in, you'll unlock another node and be able to branch off from there. There'll be active skills, passive skills, and skills that will buff your active abilities as well, which is something I'll show you shortly. So first things first, let's get into my basic skill that I want to use on this build, and that would be Hemorrhage. I'm between two different abilities here. This is something I'll want to see during the open beta. That will be Reap and Hemorrhage. So the reason I wanted to go with Hemorrhage is it's going to lead us into these blood abilities that are going to be very prevalent in this build. So you'll see here, I'm going to use Hemorrhage, which is a lucky hit chance of 40%. It bursts an enemy blood, dealing 25% damage. But Hemorrhage also has a 20% chance to create a blood orb, which gives you health. Reading forward into how I tuned this ability, we will go into Enhanced Hemorrhage. After picking up a blood orb, your next Hemorrhage also deals damage to enemies around your target, granting 2 additional essence per hit, which is like your mana. Essence is like your mana as a Necromancer. Moving forward, Hemorrhage grants a 0.64 base life, and they're going to dive into the numbers. Right now, it's unfinished, as Fortify, essentially like a shield, each time it hits an enemy, and has a 1.5 chance per enemy hit to fortify you for 100% of your base health. So the reason I'm kind of leaning towards Hemorrhage instead of Reap is the idea that there's a chance while I'm in the middle of mobs to completely bring my health back to the top, which will be very important later on as you see why I want to be maxed health pretty much all the time. The other option for this is Reap, which is essentially just a large swing of your scythe, sweeps an ethereal scythe in front of you, dealing 12% damage. Hitting an enemy with Reap increases your damage reduction by 15%. So it plays into this tank build because it does 15% damage reduction. Next, I'm going to get into our core skills, which is going to be Blood Surge. Blood Surge is going to be a very important part of this build. It's essentially a blood circle around you that's going to absorb health. So lucky hit chance is 20%. Essence cost is going to cost you 30. Draw a blood from enemies, dealing 20% damage and expelling a Blood Nova, dealing 50% damage. Blood Surge's Nova damage is increased by 10% per enemy drained, up to 50%. So you're essentially going to try to find yourself in the middle of as many mobs as possible while constantly spamming Blood Surge when you have the essence for it. Building off that, Blood Surge heals you for 1% of your maximum life when drawn blood from enemies. If blank, we're not sure quite on the enemies yet, or more enemies are drawn from, then heal for an additional percentage of your maximum life. So I'm going to be able to dive into the middle of a million adds and just constantly damage all of them while keeping myself healed. Very strong. Each time an enemy is hit by Blood Surge Nova, you are fortified per whatever percent of base life. While you are fortified over a percentage of your maximum life, Blood Surge deals increased damage. So essentially, you're building fortification, healing, and doing more damage as you're using Blood Surge. Going down here to the Macabre skills, you're going to see one of our most important skills on this build, and that is Blood Mist. Blood Mist essentially turns you into this bloody circle where you are invulnerable to damage. Invulnerable is super important in Diablo because one of the biggest dangerous factors is getting cornered by mobs and being unable to escape. So being able to pass through mobs is super important. But not only being able to pass through them, blood mist. Lucky hit chance of 9%, cooldown 19 seconds, relatively long cooldown. Disperse into a bloody mist, becoming immune for 3 seconds. Your movement speed is reduced by 50%, and you periodically deal 1.75 damage to enemies, but you heal for 100% of the damage dealt. So if you're passing through a crap ton of mods, you are healing for an insane amount of healing while you're invulnerable for 3 seconds. Really cool. Blood's Mist movement speed penalty is reduced by 20%, so you'd be slightly faster in Blood Mist, which is important. And then I built it so Blood Mist fortifies you for 0.2% base life for each enemy or each time it hits an enemy. So imagine that multiplied by a bunch of enemies that you're passing through. Really strong, just to keep you tanky, keep you shielded up, and keep you healthy. Now let's move on to corruption skills. Corruption gets crazy, and it just shows what we can start doing with some passives here. So as you can see, close enemies take 2% more damage from you and deal 3% less damage to you. Obviously, I can spec this more as I'm climbing to make the damage percentage increase. These will take 6% more damage and they'll deal 9% less to me. With 9% less damage to me is important as hell, especially as we're speccing more tanky. And you know, I say like right now we're going to leave it at 1 just to keep the nodes simple, and we'll keep moving forward. I just wanted to show kind of an understanding of how this will synergize with the build as well. Now we start getting into our corruption skills. So right now I have both of these skills selected. I wanted to kind of feel them out, but they're both going to be really strong for our style build. First, I'm going to dive into Iron Maiden. Iron Maiden curses a target area. Enemies affected by Iron Maiden will take 10% damage each time they deal direct damage. So this is where things get crazy. Now, not only am I tanking with shields and regenning health, every time I get hit by these enemies, they're taking 10% damage constantly. Let's progress through it. Iron Maiden no longer costs essence, so it's not a mana cost anymore. Gain 5 essence for each enemy cursed. So now I have a way of gaining back my mana while fighting in the middle of the fight, while making them do damage when they're damaging me as I'm tanking up. And it only gets crazier and more insane later. Just keep waiting with me here. Now moving forward, when at least 3 enemies are affected by Iron Maiden, the damage is increased by 15%. So now they will be taking an additional 15% damage. The other option for a sort of curse that I selected is Decrepify. Curse a target area. Enemies affected by Decrepify are slowed by 50%, which is always nice, and deal 25% less damage for 10 seconds. So they will be doing even less damage, making it so when they get hit by you and Iron Maiden, they're dealing even less to you, but still taking that full 25% damage. The buffs I have are Lucky Hit. Enemies hit while affected with Decrepify have a 10% chance to be stunned for 2 seconds. Really cool. And then enemies hit while affected with Decrepify have a 15% chance to reduce your active cooldowns by 1.5 seconds. So it's all going to synergize with keeping those blood mists up, making sure that you can do your blood surge, making sure you can hemorrhage. So now let's get into summoning, which you might think, hey, Shib, you mentioned this is going to be a very minimal summoning build. Why are we going to be talking about that? Because there's a specific tree in summoning which involves just blood skills, and it's going to make you super strong. So let's show what I'm talking about. Before we get into that, we also will make sure that we have spiked armor spec'd on a node as well. So while we're getting hit by these enemies and they're taking damage while hurting me, they also get hurt by the thorns from my spiked armor. We're going to spec into that pretty heavily. While below 50% life, you receive 10% more healing from all sources, making sure that I'm be able to get back to that full health really fast. Your blood skills deal 5% increased damage, increased overpower damage. This bonus is doubled while you are healthy. Okay, so this is where things are going to start getting important because you will be doing 5% increased overpower damage while you're healthy. So the goal of this build is to stay at max health as much as possible, or at least keep gaining armor, keeping our health up while our armor is depleting to keep us up at the top so we deal even more damage with our skills. And that'll synergize even more as we keep moving forward. Enemies hit with blood skills have a 25% chance to fortify you for 1% of your base life. That's insane. Every time I use a blood skill, I have another % chance to get 1% HP fortified on top of me, and that's only at its first level. Obviously, it's going to keep increasing. Eventually, it's 75%. Pretty insane. Lastly, we have, after being healthy for whatever amount of seconds, your next blood skill overpowers. Now we get into super synergistic stuff. The ultimate level of this is where the build really starts to make insane sense. The ultimate here, let's talk about what we're going to do. We're going to choose Blood Wave, obviously, because our blood skill is going to be enhanced. Blood Wave, you've probably seen it in some of the videos. It's just a large, literal wave of blood, and we're going to power it up like this. So cooldown is 50 seconds. Lucky hit chance is 30%. Conjure a tidal weight of blood that deals 90% damage and knocks enemies back. Really cool. Blood Wave now slows enemy by 50% for 4 seconds, making it so you can dance around them, get on top of them with your blood skills. And then Blood Wave leaves 3 blood orbs as it travels. So as it's traveling, we'll be able to heal ourselves while it's pushing enemies back. Right here. Increase damage reduction by 12%, reduced by 2% for each active minion. AKA, if you have minimal minions out on the field, you have even more damage reduction. So at level 1 itself, it's at 6%. When you get it to level 3 right now, obviously it might change. It's at 18% damage reduction, okay? That's insane. So we're gonna have our Golem out, so it's gonna be at roughly 16%. And not only that, sacrificing both your, this is where we're going to decide on just keeping the Golem instead of the Skeletal Mages or the Skeletal Warriors. Sacrificing Skeletal Warriors and Skeletal Mages increases their sacrifice bonus by an additional 20%. So you might be saying, what are their sacrifice bonuses? How does that work? So let's go up to the Book of the Dead, okay? So this is what I've chosen to work for this specific build. You can choose between 3 different setups for your Skeletal Warriors, Mages, or Golems. Skeletal Warriors, Skirmishers, Defenders, Reapers. Mages are Shadow, Cold, or Bone Mages. And then your Golems are Bone, Blood, and Iron Golems, okay? But when you choose to sacrifice, you can choose any of these 3 to sacrifice. Okay, I won't be using this minion, and I'll get that passive buff. So I'm going to choose to not use the Skeletal Defenders because now I'll gain an additional 15% non-physical resistance from not having these Skeletal Defenders out. But then, what did I almost forget? Right here, sacrificing Skeletal Warriors and Mages increases their sacrifice by 20% at level 1. Let's boost this thing to level 3, 60%. Now when I sacrifice Defenders, I have a 75% damage reduction to non-physical. That is insane, okay? Now we're sacrificing Skeletal Mages. What does that buff do, okay? So we're going to go to our Bone Mages because it's going to make sure our overpower damage is increased by 30%. But you can no longer raise Skeletal Mages, right? Well, that's kind of weird. It's like, oh, well, how does that work overpower? We just made it over here that your blood skills deal 5% increased overpowered damage. And it's doubled when healthy. So now we're feeding into that overpower damage. And not only is it 30%, it's 90% increased, okay? Because the additional 60 from the node at the bottom. These numbers are getting so insane. There's no way they don't get toned down. I just genuinely believe that people aren't really building into this no Necromancer summon build because it just kind of, it defeats the purpose, but I think it's busted. I mean, we'll see how it plays out. I'm excited to see how it plays out. And then last but not least, we're going to keep our Golems because there's no synergy in the build to not have the Golems around besides maybe having increased life. And you can do some of those things to sacrifice them, but I think a Golem would be important. And right now I'm keeping it as a Blood Golem because we have blood benefits. We have perks to increasing our damage with blood. And the Blood Golem is going to make it so he drains life from nearby enemies constantly as he's walking towards him. So the Blood Golem is going to be great for AoE fighting. He's going to be great for tanking. And he's super impactful for making us even tankier because you'll see here shortly, your Golem absorbs 15% of the damage that you would take. So not only are we getting all of these resistances throughout our build, our Golem is going to be also absorbing some of that damage while regenning himself. How insane is the idea of this build? So that's my idea for an insane solo blood vampire necromancer build that'll be coming out in D4. Obviously, we're going to dive into it a bit more in the beta, the open beta, where we can actually play necromancer. I'm very excited to get hands on, and I can see so much potential in this build, and that's before we even get into the Paragon tree and start diving into all that. With all that being said, I really appreciate you guys being here today. If you like this kind of content, hit that subscribe button for me. Come see me on Twitch. We just got partnered there. I'd love to have you guys stick around and talk D4 with me. Thanks again for being here, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace.